In early 2025, the Iranian Navy officially commissioned its first official aircraft carrier, the IRIS Shahid Bagheri. In doing so, Iran joined an exclusive club of countries capable of deploying these gigantic warships and projecting power far beyond their borders. On paper, it sounds like an enormous upgrade. In reality, the Shahid Bagheri barely even qualifies as a genuine aircraft carrier and would struggle to last mere seconds in any kind of confrontation with the US Navy. There are 5 big reasons for this. The first is simple. The Shahid Bagheri is not a purpose-built aircraft carrier. It's actually a converted container ship. It started life as the Pererin, a South Korean container ship created by HD Hyundai Heavy Industries back in 2000. Like other container ships, it was used for years to transport large quantities of goods around the world. Eventually, however, the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps decided to convert this vessel into a military carrier. Bit by bit, over the course of several years, they constructed an angled flight deck while preserving large parts of the original container ship's superstructure. On the one hand, this is quite a resourceful, cost-effective way to construct a carrier. Vessels of this size and strength tend to be reserved for the world's biggest and richest militaries. The only countries with full-scale aircraft carriers, for example, are the United States, China, Russia, the United Kingdom, India, France, and Italy. All of those nations, bar Italy, rank in the top 10 countries for military spending worldwide. The likes of South Korea, Brazil, Australia, and Turkey have also smaller-scale aircraft carriers, but also spend relatively high amounts on their military forces. Iran's military budget is lower than all of the aforementioned nations, so it has to find ways to make savings where it can, even if that involves cutting a few corners and defying a few conventions along the way. That's why, rather than building a brand new custom-designed aircraft carrier from the ground up, it made the call to use a container ship as a base, saving an incalculable amount of money in design, development, and production costs. Unfortunately, that decision also presents numerous problems, because apart from both being huge vessels, container ships and aircraft carriers are incredibly different. The best aircraft carriers are meticulously designed. Every single detail is planned out and calculated with care. Every layer, every component, and every system forms part of the overall structure, resulting in not just the biggest, but the most formidable vessels the world has ever seen, with extraordinary offensive and defensive capabilities and state-of-the-art technologies. The Shahid Bagheri is light years away from those kinds of carriers. In fact, when the first images of it emerged, many experts noted how much it looked like the HMS Furious, a British Royal Navy aircraft carrier that was commissioned over a century ago during the First World War. Analysts have also drawn comparisons between the Shahid Bagheri and other carriers of decades gone by that were also made by converting pre-existing vessels. Like HMS Audacity, another Royal Navy vessel, which began life as a German merchant ship, was converted into a carrier and sank mere months after being commissioned. That doesn't mean it's impossible to craft a decent carrier on the foundations of a container or merchant ship. Various military forces have used this technique over the years, including the United States, but in the modern era, almost all carriers are built from scratch. Why? Because as Iran found out, while it may be a more affordable option, converting a container vessel into an aircraft carrier is quite a challenging proposition. One of the biggest challenges they clearly encountered was building the flight deck and runway. The old container vessel's superstructure spanned the entire width of the vessel, and Iran decided to leave it in place to save time and money. But that meant they weren't able to construct a conventional flat-top flight deck configuration, as there simply wasn't enough space available. Instead, they had to make a slightly sloping flight deck and angled runway in order to provide enough room for aircraft to take off and land. On top of that, the runway, which runs for some 590 feet or 180 meters in total, is notably narrow, leaving very little margin for error for pilots landing their craft on the carrier. If their angles are even off a minuscule amount, they could end up striking the superstructure and dealing serious damage. Thanks to this, the Shahid Bagheri looks and feels somewhat like a Frankenstein's monster of a vessel, a vague imitation of an aircraft carrier cobbled together in unusual, obscure ways. And it's become something of a meme among military analysts, with many questioning whether it should really be classified as an aircraft carrier at all. Which leads us neatly onto the second big drawback of the Shahid Bagheri, its carrier capabilities. True full-scale aircraft carriers live up to their name and are capable of carrying large amounts of diverse aircraft. The biggest and best US carriers, for example, like the USS Gerald Ford, which is the biggest aircraft carrier in existence and the largest warship ever built, can carry more than 75 aircraft at a time. That includes world-leading strike fighter jets like the FA-18 Super Hornet and F-35 Lightning II, helicopters like the SH-60 Seahawk and C-2 Greyhound, electronic warfare aircraft like the EA-18G Growler, and airborne early warning systems like the E-2D Hawkeye. In other words, true aircraft carriers are basically portable air bases, with vast flight decks, huge hangars, and lengthy runways that allow for the safe takeoff and landing of numerous kinds of aircraft. They empower the countries that control them to position entire aerial forces almost anywhere they want and orchestrate large-scale operations far from home. The IRIS Shahid Bagheri isn't in the same league. It doesn't have the space or the requisite runway length to support landings and takeoffs for most kinds of aircraft, including fighter jets. As a result, it's only really useful for carrying helicopters and unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, otherwise known as drones. Indeed, imagery released by Iranian officials of the vessel has shown at least 3 drone variants on board, along with 4 helicopters. While details are scarce, analysts believe that the carrier could be used to transport a range of fixed-wing drones, such as the Shahid 129, the Gaza, or the Cayman 22. It also seems suitable for launching vertical takeoff and landing (VTOL) drones, as well as medium-altitude long-endurance models. Jet-powered drones might also be stationed on board a carrier of this kind, along with helicopters with a range of roles and loadouts, and experts expect it could be used as a base for long-range kamikaze drone attacks on enemy targets. It almost certainly will not, however, be compatible with jets, bombers, or conventional electronic warfare aircraft of any kind. Again, this isn't necessarily such a bad thing. A drone and helicopter carrier is still better than no carrier at all, and drones are undoubtedly set to play an increasingly large part in modern warfare for the foreseeable future. That's one of the reasons why other nations are also actively exploring more compact carriers like this that they could use for transporting drone armies around the globe. Turkey, for example, commissioned the TCG Anadolu, otherwise known as the Beast of the Black Sea, back in 2023. The Anadolu is an amphibious assault ship designed to carry large quantities of drones out to sea and boasts some impressive onboard technologies and technical specifications. Vessels like this are undoubtedly useful, but only to a certain extent. Without being able to carry jets and other aircraft, the Shahid Bagheri will never be able to match the utility and value of a carrier like the USS Gerald Ford. It will never be able to be used for the kinds of complex, large-scale operations usually associated with vessels of this size and scale. Nor will it ever be able to strike the same kind of fear into Iran's enemies as a proper carrier with its own integrated strike group. Now, before we move on to the next fatal flaw of this Iranian aircraft carrier, if this is the kind of insight you want more of, make sure you're subscribed to the Military Show. We break it down like this every week. The third big issue with the Shahid Bagheri is its defensive capabilities. Not only is it incapable of matching the offensive output of a true carrier, but it's also nowhere near as resilient either. That's not to say it doesn't have onboard armaments and defenses. Iranian officials have revealed that the vessel is equipped with an array of missiles, including 8 cruise anti-ship missiles and another 8 multi-purpose Kausar 222 missiles. In addition, it has a turret with a 30mm automatic cannon, along with several onboard Gatling guns. The head of the Iranian Navy has also stated that the ship boasts signals intelligence and passive electromagnetic listening technology, along with the ability to deploy remote drone submarines to defend itself in hostile waters. It's worth noting that Iranian officials do have something of a track record when it comes to hyping up their military innovations, often without genuine evidence to back up their claims. As such, we have to take everything they say with a grain of salt. Even so, there's enough data to suggest that the Shahid Bagheri at least has some ability to strike back at any enemy ships or aircraft it might encounter. But its defensive capacity still pale in comparison to the world's finest carriers. The Gerald Ford, for example, utilizes a multi-layered, specially designed defense system, including advanced radar and electronic warfare suites to detect and disrupt nearby threats, combined with multiple world-leading missile systems, radar-guided Mk-15 Phalanx CIWS guns, and multiple advanced machine gun systems. Plus, since bigger and better carriers like this are capable of carrying large numbers of fighter jets and electronic attack aircraft, they have so many different ways to defend themselves, making the very prospect of attacking a carrier an almost impossible feat for any opposing force. On top of all of that, since almost all modern carriers are designed and constructed from scratch, they're typically fitted with advanced armor protection from top to bottom, along with redundancy and recovery systems to cope in case any damage is sustained. The Shahid Bagheri doesn't have any of that because, as explained earlier, it's little more than a converted carrier. And carrier ships, while strong, don't have military-grade fortifications, reinforced hull armor, or multi-layered, fully integrated defensive networks. As a result, even after Iran's improvements to this vessel, it's still much more vulnerable to damage and eventual destruction from modern anti-ship weaponry. Faced with a serious military force like the United States, for example, a carrier like this would be little more than cannon fodder. US forces could theoretically launch a saturation missile strike, for example, firing an array of missiles from land, air and sea, and even underwater with the aid of submarines, to overwhelm the Shahid Bagheri's limited defenses, damaging its fragile hull and sending it sinking down to the ocean depths in a matter of minutes. Another drawback to the Shahid Bagheri is tied to a general weakness in the Iranian Navy, namely the fact that Iran simply doesn't possess the necessary naval strength to create a proper carrier strike group. The US and other military forces tend to deploy aircraft carriers as the central forces of strike groups, accompanied by an array of destroyers, cruisers, submarines, and other support ships to provide diverse defensive and offensive options. Even smaller navies with carriers are still able to maintain a certain level of multi-layered protection by combining their carriers with other vessels and aircraft. Unfortunately for Iran, there's little evidence that the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy can muster the necessary forces to form this sort of strike or escort group. It simply doesn't have a big enough force to do so, with no real destroyers to speak of and only limited quantities of frigates, corvettes, and patrol vessels. Again, this severely limits the practical applications and survivability of the Shahid Bagheri. Far stronger militaries like the US and China can confidently send their carriers on long-range operations hundreds or even thousands of miles from home. They know that these warships will be safe, not only because of their numerous onboard defenses, but because of the many protections provided by the ships, subs and planes that form their vast strike groups. This allows them to truly project power far and wide. But with only one substandard carrier and minimal reinforcements, Iran can't compete. Instead, its carrier is more of a support vessel than a strike group leader. It wouldn't be much use if Iran wanted to establish air superiority over an enemy, for example, or carry out precision deep strike missions, or even to support sustained expeditionary combat operations beyond its native waters. The fifth and final critical weakness of the Shahid Bagheri is its very limited specifications when compared to most modern carriers. Many carriers today are capable of speeds of 30 knots or more, 34.5 miles per hour. The Gerald Ford, for instance, is one of several carriers that can exceed this speed. The Shahid Bagheri, meanwhile, has a meager maximum speed of just 22 knots or 25 miles per hour. That's a problem for several reasons. Firstly, it means that if the Bagheri needs to tactically reposition in order to evade incoming threats or escape hostile waters, it's going to take much longer to do so than other carriers. That provides more time for enemy forces to target it and potentially take it out. And since it moves so slowly, it's also easier for missiles and bombers to lock onto as well. In addition, this carrier slow speed also means that traveling long distances in preparation of military operations will take longer, giving the enemy more time to understand what's happening and prepare its defenses. In short, it's much more difficult to take an enemy by surprise or operate in a rapid reactive way when you're working with such a slow vessel. And it's not only speed that the Shahid Bagheri struggles with. Most of today's top carriers have state-of-the-art radar systems, integrated electronic warfare suites, and command systems to help them integrate with network forces, serving as the command centers of complex operations. Very few of these features have been either observed or verified on the Bagheri. It has some radar technology and signals intelligence, SIGINT systems, but when compared to American, Chinese, and other carriers, it appears almost primitive in its design and capabilities. Despite all of this, the Bagheri is not a worthless addition to the Iranian Navy. Aircraft carriers, even relatively small and basic ones like this, are highly prized vessels. Very few militaries have them at their disposal, and Iran has entered an exclusive club by successfully constructing one of its own. And while it may have little value for high-intensity naval warfare situations, there are still plenty of ways in which Iranian forces might benefit from this addition to their arsenal. At 41,000 tons in weight and more than 780 feet or 240 meters in length, it's far from a small vessel and is certainly large enough and strong enough to, at the very least, intimidate smaller and weaker forces, while also expanding Iran's power projection across the Middle Eastern region. Iranian officials also claim that the Bagheri has an operational range of up to 22,000 nautical miles, 41,000 kilometers, enabling presence and operations lasting up to a year without the need to refuel. Again, there may be a difference between what Iran says the Bagheri can do and what it can actually do, but it's still a big ship packed full of firepower and could prove useful for drone attacks or helicopter assaults of coastal territories. And with Iran investing in drone technology, it could produce bigger, better and smarter drones in the future, all of which can be designed with the Bagheri in mind, opening up new opportunities for various kinds of drone-based operations near and far from Iranian territory. All in all, the carrier holds some degree of value. However, its many weaknesses cannot be understated. It has nowhere near the same offensive or defensive capacities as the world's best carriers, and even lesser helicopter carriers like those possessed by countries like Japan, France, South Korea, and Australia are still much more powerful, versatile, and tougher nuts to crack than the Bagheri. Its design is inherently flawed, its current and future capacities are limited, and Iran has almost zero experience when it comes to maintaining a vessel of this enormous size too. The country's forces will have to learn and adapt quickly and efficiently if they want any hope of making the most of this colossal weapons system. Because of these reasons, and many more, major military superpowers like the United States certainly won't be too concerned about the Shahid Bagheri. They'll take it seriously, understanding the damage it can deal and the threat it might pose in the future, but they have no real reason to fear it. Indeed, all it would take is one well-planned missile barrage or submarine strike to send this massive hunk of metal down to the briny depths. And if ever Iran attempted to use the Bagheri against the US Navy, it would quickly crumble under the sheer weight of American firepower and strategic superiority. Unfortunately for Iran, the same can be said for its naval force in general, which is dramatically smaller and weaker than the US Navy and would barely be able to even dent a well-organized American carrier group. In short, if Iran thought that the Bagheri would strike fear into its enemies, then they clearly have no idea who they're dealing with. Now, you can learn more about how a prospective US versus Iran war might play out in our hour-by-hour video breakdown. Or check out this video to see how American aerial superiority was able to wipe out Iran's entire air defense system in a matter of minutes back during Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025. And for more detailed military analysis and breaking news reports, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications today.